Welcome everyone to Ironside's Take30 series. Today's topic is migrating to Amazon QuickSight and ROI analysis. My name is Terry Hinton, and my role at Ironside is to work with our customers and with our colleagues at AWS to help accelerate our customers' journey to cloud-native data implementations. And our speaker today is Eduardo Arazo, and Eduardo will introduce himself here shortly. So before we get into the session, I just want to make you aware of our winter series for these Take30 webinars. Eduardo, if you could advance us there. We have two upcoming really exciting webinars. The first one is January 18th on enterprise safe generative AI, a very hot topic with our customers today. And then a second session where we'll be co-presented with AWS on embedded analytics with Amazon QuickSight, another hot topic. So before we jump into the session here, let me give you just a few comments about Ironside. For those of you who've not worked with us before, Ironside, you want to go to the next slide, Eduardo? So Ironside has been a data consultancy business founded in 1999, so roughly 25 years of business, and we work with clients across the spectrum, the data estate spectrum. In particular, from a business intelligence perspective, we help customers implement their data initiatives and migrations around different data structures, data warehouses, data lakes. And then our data science team has the data science as a service platform where we help customers fast start their AI machine learning projects. We have a business use case process to take them through, and then help them launch those applications in a very quick manner. When it comes to business intelligence, which is the center of our topic today, we've helped hundreds of customers drive their business intelligence initiatives across the past 25 years. And recently we're hearing a lot of excitement around the QuickSight product. Lots of great features we hear about, from the ability to auto scale, the ability to have unified usage across data visualization, paginated reports, and then a very exciting announcement from last year around generative BI really has a lot of interest in Amazon QuickSight. And one of the most common things we hear from customers about QuickSight is the breakthrough cost model for the industry, that customers see significant cost savings. And we get one of two types of calls very frequently. One call says, look, we have a legacy BI license that's going to expire in 6 months that we need to renew. We'd like to not do that. We'd like to get to QuickSight. Can we achieve that migration in that time period? And then the second kind of call we get is, we've decided to move to QuickSight. We need to budget for that. So we need to get your deep understanding in the migration process, the migration cost. How do we put together the TCO going forward? So that's a really hot topic among our customers. And that gets us to where we are today. So we built a program around that to help customers, go through a very thorough process to come up with that ROI analysis. And that's what Eduardo is going to take us through now.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Terry. Yeah, I'm Eduardo Arazo. I'm an engagement manager in the data strategy practice for Ironside. Joined pretty recently. But I've held roles everything from technical, like developer data scientist roles, all the way to the executive level. So we'll try to run through this somewhat quickly and leave some time for questions. I'll be happy to field any questions or discussion here at the end that we may have from the audience. So
Eduardo, sorry, just let me break in here. There's the Zoom screen should have a button for Q&A, so you can ask questions at any time during the session, and we'll see how much time is left and how many of those we can answer in real time. Thanks.
All right, so some of the objectives for today. First is, like we've already mentioned, is introducing the concepts and the approaches for developing the business or financial justification, or in other words, the ROI, for actually undergoing the BI migration modernization to QuickSight from other tools. And then we have a quick example with actual data, real world data that we have modeled out so that we can actually see something concrete, along with some of the more kind of theoretical or academic side of an ROI TCO. First thing, let's take a step back and say, why do we even want to do an ROI assessment for a migration, right? First thing, someone's likely to ask. You may have leadership, your CIO, your CTO, CFO, right? Maybe someone with your finance team saying, why are we even doing this, right? Like, what does this actually look like? Why are we spending money on this? We already have a BI tool, right? So having the answers to those questions can definitely help to move this along, so we can hit some of the goals with our BI or data strategy as a whole within the organization. Secondly, as Terry was mentioning before, we know that QuickSight has a very meaningful run rate savings relating to licensing costs from many other BI tools out there. So it's good to actually get that quantified so we can look at a side-by-side comparison to help us with our decision analysis, right, for the migration itself, the approach, the strategy, all of that. Another thing to consider is the actual cloud consumption model. If you're going from an on-prem or other types of tools, can have a broader economic impact, right? We talk about that in TCO, or total cost of ownership. So we'll break that down here in a little bit. But this also allows us to consider kind of the entire world of possibilities there, the entire ecosystem that we could potentially impact. Next thing to consider is that migrations do require an investment, right? So ideally, we do the migration that allows our total cost of ownership in our future state, right, or in QuickSight to be lower, therefore allowing justification for the actual expense of the migration. At the same time, this also allows us to optimize our BI environment and our BI assets and tools so that we run a pretty lean or right-sized type of tooling situation in the future state. And then, kind of towards the end, there's other questions that pop up here, right? Like, what exactly is going to be the approach for the migration? What does that timeline look like? What is the roadmap? How long is that going to take? And in a more kind of quantifiable fashion, what is the actual break-even period for this type of migration due to the ROI, right? So kind of putting this all together, we're basically saying, is the juice worth the squeeze for undergoing a migration, which a lot of times is a pretty large effort to undertake. We mentioned TCO, so let's do a quick refresher on this. According to Gartner, TCO basically considers all the costs across the enterprise over time for IT, and in kind of this environment that we're talking about, right, in data, BI, we consider things like hardware and software costs, management and support, any kind of downtimes that can happen for our end users while we transition over, any kind of communication strategy that needs to be sent out by either the IT department or the organization as a whole, and also some training and potential productivity losses that come along with starting to use a new tool, right? So through the TCO, we look at some of the changes that can happen to technology and people, and we compare that in the legacy versus the future state. Now, this being said, right, this sounds like a very daunting thing to undertake, but we must also know that some things just are not going to change, right? There's going to be some kind of baseline to the business, to the organization, right? So as much as we want to quantify everything possible, right, there is going to be a certain kind of barrier where we just say, hey, this is not going to change. We're going to ignore those costs, and we're really going to be looking at only the things that are going to be impacted in a meaningful way. So let's look at the actual ROI model in a more graphical interface here. And so we have basically the cost of ownership on the y-axis over time. And so we start on the left-hand side saying, this is where we currently are. This is our legacy TCO, our legacy BI tools where we currently stand. And we know that there is some kind of cost ownership to maintaining and using that tool set. We want to get to a future state. And, that is in QuickSight most times going to be a lower TCO spend, right? But how do we get from left-hand side to right-hand side here? Right, that's kind of what we're looking at here. And ideally, again, we end up with some kind of savings after the migration from running our actual BI environment. So first curve here, right, we understand that at some point, we're going to start to deprecate our legacy TCO, right? So our dashboards and reports and data sets we're going to start removing those from production and even maybe from test environments, right, as we start doing the migration itself, while we also start to build up those assets again in the future state. Now, we consider this in kind of three different phases. The first one being the rationalization phase, where a lot of times, we're probably seeing this a lot, where we have reports that are just not being used any longer, or abandoned, we call that, right? Maybe reports that have been duplicated that just don't have the value that they need, and we're paying to maintain those reports when really they're not, really producing much for the team's organization that are actually using them. The next phase is going to be the migration phase itself. And you notice there, kind of that green shaded area, right? As soon as we start deprecating assets from a legacy TCO, we can start recouping some of that cost that can then be used for other things, such as the migration itself. Now, consider that there is going to be that upfront investment in undergoing this kind of effort. So you see the red shaded area there extends even before the rationalization period, where we start considering talking about maybe engaging different people around the organization or contractors to actually start planning out the actual migration itself. And then obviously you see where those two lines cross. At some point, we maintain two environments. So we're going to be spiking our spend there a little bit, but it's going to be for a short amount of time. That's where we can also optimize the approach to the migration. And eventually, we get to the steady state itself, where we're running only off of QuickSight, and we're able to deprecate all of the legacy BI tools and ecosystems. A model like this allows us to get more down in the weeds, right? So we can quantify exactly our break even and our ROI for the actual migration itself. But it's good to see this kind of in a conceptual manner right here. So we can actually then start putting numbers and measuring a lot of these curves and shaded areas that we see on the screen. So getting a little bit more in the details here, right? We consider three components of the ROI analysis. This is a wordy slide. I'm going to try to keep it short, and I think this video will be available later on if anyone wants to revisit the slide and really go down into the details here. But similarly, we start off with things to consider for the components of the ROI analysis on the left-hand side being our current TCO, right? Now, at this point, I'm seeing a lot of organizations that have multi-tool ecosystems, so that can be multiple mixes of BI tools, a lot of the ones that we already see out there that are kind of the common offerings. A lot of organizations have now expanded, right, either by necessity or just by legacy environments, right? We see many different tools out there. So what does that look like for a TCO? Sometimes it's not as simple as one tool, one measuring, one quantifiable kind of aspect of that, but it's going to be multiple. Similarly, we consider the licenses, the types of licenses that are out there. Many tools, QuickSight included, have different tiers of licenses. And so depending on how your organization is functioning, right, we have to consider that, quantify it, measure it, instrument it, and then also get the cost per license, per account, right? That allows us to start building up all the financial analysis that we need for the actual ROI. Underlying the BI tool, there's usually always some kind of server spend, right? So we have to quantify that as well. Is it on-prem, cloud, some kind of hybrid environment? Support, is that internal, external to the organization? Are there other security components? The dashboards and reports themselves, which we usually call BI assets. And then the actual development, testing, and deployment resources that we potentially need in the current TCO or the current state, legacy state. And then what does that look like? How would that change in future state, right? So future state, skipping over the middle here just for 1 second, looks very similar to that, but also understanding that there's a lot of benefits to being in QuickSight. We'll touch on some of those later, but quick example, right? QuickSight is serverless, so we may repurpose some individuals' times into other areas of IT layers of the organization because we're removing some of that level of effort that exists in the current TCO. But other than that, the current and future TCO, we try to keep those as even as possible so we can get the delta between those two, which then becomes the actual return on investment between the two actual TCOs. And here in the middle, other things to consider for the migration, we talked about the rationalization period, right? So there's savings potentials there. Like I mentioned, right, any kind of duplication of reports or things that have been abandoned, right? Are there redundancies? A lot of times we see organizations that say we really only need to migrate 80%, 70%, 60% of our reports. The other ones just aren't providing value or they're duplicates, right? Or we want to make a concerted effort to be cleaner and more optimized as we head into our future state. Throughout the migration, or preceding it actually, we also look at a complexity assessment. So is there feature compatibility or parity between the legacy tools and QuickSight, right? All tools, BI tools at this point do very similar things, but sometimes there are edge cases that there may not be perfect compatibility for those. So are there workarounds, right? Are we going to say some assets are just going to be stranded? Are we going to build something new to replace that? What does that actually look like? Similarly, with the migration effort, we can look at other sources of optimization, such as our data sources, right? Can we actually simplify those data sources? Is there a migration needed for those sources to go from maybe an on-prem server to something cloud that's maybe cheaper, more pay-as-you-go, right? Can we increase performance by keeping the same level of spend, right? All these things that we can consider as the migration becomes an opportunity to revisit some of the underlying infrastructure for our BI tool sets. And then kind of lastly here, right, the pace of the migration itself. Some people, like Terry mentioned, says we have 6 months to do this. Can we do it in that time? So people say, hey, we just want to do this by the end of year, right? So there's many different considerations there for the actual transition plan and timing, or the roadmap of the migration itself. And then lastly, we'll cover this kind of at the very end of this presentation. There are some soft ROI considerations that we talk about that may not be purely quantifiable, but we've seen that QuickSight does provide a lot of other benefits that are harder to pin down, but equally valuable for organization and a BI team. Now, as we build these ROI scenarios, when we start doing this analysis, right, there's many levers that we can act on so that we can create a spectrum of ROIs, right, from very conservative to very aggressive scenarios of how much money do we actually want to save for us to be in our future state. So just some of the things to consider here, right? Licensing, talked about that a little bit, the account type. Are we provisioning everyone across the organization with a license? Is this going to be only the dev team, the tech teams, right? Only need to know individuals? What does that actually look like, right? And that can be a big cost savings for a lot of individuals, or it can also serve in a way that you want to democratize or expand the use of BI across your organization. So just things to consider there. Moving towards the right-hand side here, report features. Every tool, again, has different feature sets. QuickSight is not different than that. So depending on if you need things like pagination or cache data behind your reports, or even our buzzy Gen BI or Gen AI kind of tool sets, right? QuickSight does provide that, but sometimes there's different cost components to that. Moving around here to the left-hand side, the report rationalization. Again, we talked about that, right? Do we need to migrate everything? Is this an opportunity for us to clean up our BI assets a little bit? And lastly, personnel needs and support. Again, QuickSight is completely serverless. So a lot of times when we had individuals who were focusing on DevOps or servers, care and feeding, that kind of stuff, right? We can remove that entirely from the responsibilities of our teams because that is internal to the tool in AWS itself. So that's a big lever potentially there that we can also save. Then repurpose either that time or those individuals elsewhere in the organization or within IT so they can help in other areas to advance the overall kind of strategy. So that being said, let's put this into more concrete terms and let's look at some actual data that we have compiled here. So we talked to a client, which was a large energy management services company. They were running a Cognos BI environment. They had a lot of on-prem hosting, 4 different environments of varying sizes. They were provisioning about 10,000 licenses across their entire ecosystem. And they also had a very significant reliance on their run support or patching, if you will, for their current situation. And so I've itemized it here in kind of a summary way so we can look at this quickly. But you see here where we have the different types of cost to complete our kind of TCO, right? Total cost of ownership. And we see different licenses, the ETL, the server cost, right? The personnel, and then even support that can be outlined here. And so going back to some of the levers that we talked about, right? Licenses, that comes into play here. These are things that are going to change in this line item breakdown. Servers, again, that's going to change, right? That's an underlying feature that QuickSight and AWS provides on a serverless basis. And then personnel, they're going to be repurposed because it is a much lighter level of effort to maintain. and do care and feeding on QuickSight. So we created different scenarios to see the level of efficiency and optimization that we could reach with a migration from that legacy environment to QuickSight. And so we see our levers here on the left-hand side again start to come up, and created on two sides of the spectrum a very conservative scenario and then a very aggressive scenario for savings, so we can see how we can maximize or play with the ROI outcomes for this. So you see again here where licenses are being adjusted, where report features, right, or that the kind of the bells and whistles that come with QuickSight, how those are going to be impacted there as well. If you go more open and free with using some of that, or to be restricted more. And then lastly, the actual personnel adjustment for the dedication needed for BI. And the punchline here is that our conservative scenario actually saw 55% savings from legacy to doing that conversion to QuickSight. And on a much more aggressive way, we saw 70% savings based on legacy to QuickSight. So what this actually means with the conservative and aggressive scenarios, right? This provides us some extra leeway, right? Some extra kind of slack in our financial budget to actually pay for the migration or engage in that kind of situation to actually get us to that future state. So we see here on the left-hand side, we have the conservative scenario. They're running about $2.2 million on their TCO. By moving over to QuickSight, they could have saved about $1.2 million. So we can theoretically say that that's about as much as we can spend on a migration effort while we still hit a break even within 1 year. In the much more conservative scenario, right, we see a very similar thing, but now we have $1.5 million by really tightening up those levers that we could potentially spend in that same kind of year period and justify the actual spend on the migration itself. These are fantastic numbers that we see here. I think any C-level individual that sees this kind of performance, right, will be not asking many more questions about why we're doing the migration. So we'll just keep that kind of in mind. Now, the last piece I talked about, right, is kind of the soft benefits of the modernization to QuickSight. And so not everything can be quantified, but we also put together some ideas here for other benefits that can come from moving to QuickSight, right? We talked about the organization itself. We can find some competitive advantages, promotes more of a cloud native transition, right? Or cloud only transition for IT once you start getting our BI assets in there. The technology itself, I think QuickSight is a fantastic tool. They have a lot of really good benefits that are uncommon to find in other tools, such as the Gen BI, right? Or having a completely serverless environment. The learning curve for QuickSight is also much shallower, right? So you can turn more of your employees across the organization into citizen developers and really expand and democratize the consumption and the use of BI. From a process standpoint, a lot of really good benefits there as well. Everything from more of a centralized governance if you're moving everything to the cloud. Browser-based access, no more downloading tools or software packages to getting your BI tools. Everything is native in browsers for QuickSight, so that's a big benefit. Security, AWS has top-notch security, right? So if you're looking for some of that too, there's been hot topics lately in the industry. So how do we secure it more? AWS is one of the best out there, if not the best. And lastly, the agility that can be provided by going to AWS tool sets that are going to be fully global. You can have assets across the entire US. You can have duplicates from different regions and zones in case anything can potentially go down, or you want to share assets across the globe for less latency, right? That ability is there instead of having just let's say an on-prem server sitting in a basement somewhere you're building, right? You're able to have a fully global reach with a really low latency and a really low cost at a few clicks of a button to change those assets around. And so, again, just kind of think that the benefits to this kind of migration, when we talk about the ROI, TCO, very financial, quantifiable, heavy terms, there's more pieces to the puzzle when it comes to considering why we'd want to do this kind of migration. And with that, we'll go to the Q&A. Terry, is that you?
Yes, hold on one second. Okay, very good. Yeah, thanks, Eduardo. And we've already got a question in here, but push your Q&A button and we'll read the questions and get through. We've got a few minutes here to go through a few. So The first question we have in is, what is the definition of Gen BI? Are there other solutions that provide Gen BI as a benefit? So, Eduardo, you want to take that one?
Sure. So Gen BI, we've heard a lot about Gen AI, right? ChatGPT, those kind of things. So QuickSight has this new feature set where you can ask it to build dashboards. So you can literally in kind of plain text ask it, build a dashboard that contains a year-over-year chart of our financial performance based on sales, and it can actually build that up for you. So you don't need to have a lot of kind of heavy development time. That is a feature set that's, I think, very, very cool, extraordinarily useful for organizations. So that's Gen BI itself. There is a flip side of that same coin, where if you have a dashboard, and if you enable Q in your dashboards for QuickSight, Q is the feature set where you can ask the dashboard a question, and it will scan through the dashboard, scan through the data, and basically surface the answer for you based on what's been visualized or what the underlying data are for the dashboard. So that's kind of the Gen BI, where you have more of that ChatGPT aspect, right, to the actual BI environment.
Okay, thanks, Eduardo. Let's see. Wait, give it another minute or so to see if there are other questions that come through, but I'll ask one that we frequently get asked. Oh, actually, here's a question coming through. QuickSight licensing is based on seats, to my knowledge. If the legacy system does not have a cost per seat and there's a large base of users accessing the BI tool, could the TCO be higher after the migration? Do you ever come across such a case?
Yeah, so I think QuickSight has expanded now their actual financials or commercials, whatever you want to call it. So you can actually pay for sessions where you don't need to have an actual license. So you can buy 20,000, 50,000 sessions for QuickSight, and you can have any individual log in. They don't need to have a specific user or license base, right? QuickSight AWS just looks at how many views, basically, or how many users that dashboard has had over time, and you can actually pay for sessions that way. So you don't necessarily need the licenses anymore. And a lot of that, usually when the AWS model, it's pay as you go. So you can start off with kind of a baseline, and then you can up that if you start seeing a lot more traffic come your way.
All right. And a follow-on question, are there other solutions that provide the Gen BI benefit?
So as far as I know, and I may be wrong because I haven't cruised through all the releases today, but QuickSight is if not the most advanced, one of the only tools out there that actually offer that.
Okay, very good. And we're about at time here, so I'll tie this off. And so first off, early next week, if you go to our ironsidegroup.com resource page, you'll be able to watch this via a link to our YouTube channels and other videos. Don't forget, and so if you have others that maybe you want to have review this, or you want to go back through it, that should be available early next week. Don't forget about our next two sessions coming up on generative AI and embedded analytics. Thank you for coming, and we'd love to talk to you about your individual situation. Every environment we encounter is different. So we look at it that way, but we show up with a set of tools and methodologies that really help you assess and drive your project at a faster pace and get to that return on investment faster. So love to hear from you. Reach out, and I think that's it. Eduardo, anything else in closing?
I just want to say thank you, everyone, for coming and for sharing some of your afternoon with us. Hope to hear from you soon.
Thanks.